Pete Larson knew better than to start digging before summer. Snows across the Badlands are a dime a dozen, even in May, and fossils don't play well when wet. See, water expands as it freezes, which can literally blow the delicate bones apart. Plus, if it's too far below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the surrounding rock will stick to the fossils, leading to even more damage. It's a certifiable mess waiting to happen. Bad for bones, bad for tools, bad for those digging. But Pete was hot on the trail of a T-Rex, his 8th and counting, and he wasn't waiting any longer. Buried on the Wyrex family's ranch in Baker, Montana, the specimen had first come to the paleontologist's attention in 2002, when amateur fossil hunters brought a toe bone to his facility, the Black Hills Institute of Geological Research in Hill City, South Dakota. The digit was only about 4 inches long, but Pete, who is quite possibly the world's foremost excavator of Tyrannosaurs Rex, recognized it instantly.
So they asked what it was, and I said, it's T-Rex, go back and find more.
And they did. Over the next 2 years, the fossil hunters found both legs and pieces of the pelvis and tail not far from that toe. And since the exposed parts of the pelvis and tail led safely underground, there was likely much more below the surface. Which brings us to May 2004. Finally on site, Pete and his team from the Institute were digging through muck and mud in a long-dried lake bed within the Hell Creek Formation, one of the most famous dinosaur-bearing geologic regions in the world. Triceratops, duck-billed Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and T-Rex have all emerged from this hotbed of late Cretaceous activity which stretches across the upper Great Plains in the US. In fact, T-Rex was first discovered right here, back in 1902. Within days of breaking ground, temperatures dropped into the 20s. The compact tractor they'd brought to haul earth from the site broke down unexpectedly, and of course, it snowed.
Just a little bit of rain turns it back into mud again. And once in a while, somebody would get stuck in the mud, and so I have to go pull them out.
In between bouts of rain and breaks to warm their frigid toes, the crew cut into the hillside, prying apart mounds of dirt with picks and shovels, brushing the top layer of crusted mud away with paintbrushes. Inch by inch, the Rex was revealed. A clawfoot, then a chevron, followed by a neck rib, next a wrist bone, and soon enough, pieces of the skull. Things were looking promising, even if a few of those oh-so-exciting skull bones ended up belonging to a fossilized turtle. Then on day 9, they found it. Or rather, they didn't find it.
We're following kind of a string of vertebrae. We're working, cleaning them back, going back further and further on the tail. We got to the 7th vertebrae, we got to the 10th vertebrae, we got to the 11th vertebrae, and then we got to the 12th vertebrae of the tail. It should have about 45 total to get to the tip. And it suddenly stopped.
In 30 years of digging up dinosaurs, Pete had never seen anything like this.
Only half of the 12th vertebra was there. And that made no sense. That made absolutely no sense. You know, if it ended at the end of the vertebra, okay, the tail got drug off by a scavenger or something. Maybe a group of turtles carried it off in the water. But no, it was right in the middle of it.
The team kept searching, scouring farther and farther away from the spine to see if perhaps it had been washed away from the body. They dug deeper into the lake bed, looking for evidence of a fracture at the bottom of the gully, a geologic fault where the rest of the vertebrae could have literally slipped through the cracks. There was nothing. The tail?
It just ended. It was gone.
I'm Emma Shklovin, flying solo this episode, and this is Beyond Bones, a podcast from the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Here at HMNS, we care for a collection of more than 2.5 million artifacts. Each object, from the most hulking T-Rex skeleton to the tiniest seashell, has a story. We're taking you behind the scenes to find out where they came from, how they ended up in our care, and what we do to preserve them, because there's so much beyond bones happening inside our halls. Ever since the specimen known as Wyrex joined our paleontology hall in 2012, visitors have been asking one thing: what happened to his tail? And we get it. When all the other T-Rexes in our hall have tails that stretch around 20 feet, Wyrex's 5-foot nubbin kinda stands out. It's a mystery so intriguing that it was even at the center of a 2015 National Geographic Channel special, T-Rex: Ultimate Survivor. And it's being featured in the new documentary T-Rex, which roars into IMAX and other museum cinemas, including HM&S's Wortham Giant Screen Theater, this summer.
When we first found that was a discussion we had to have, was, are we going to restore the tail? And if it had been just lost in the geologic record, probably we would have.
This is David Temple, HM&S's curator of paleontology, who's spent quite a bit of time with our bobtailed Rex over the years.
But when they came to the final vertebra, they said they could tell from that it was a bite mark. Wyrex got maybe about 2/3 of his tail bitten off.
That was such a wonderful, detail in the life history of that particular animal. Of course, we don't want to restore that. So we left the tail as it was found.
What exactly took a bite out of arguably the greatest predator to ever walk our Earth? We're jumping back 68 million years to get to the bottom of this prehistoric whodunit. Welcome to the late Cretaceous, i.e. the age of Rex Prime. We know, a big screen blockbuster that shall not be named led you to believe Tyrannosaurs Rex lived during the Jurassic period. That's the stuff of movie myths. Rex ruled the forested subtropical wetlands that dominated the western part of North America with its ferocious jaws of doom. Patent pending. Packed with curved, conical, serrated teeth the size of railway spikes, T-Rex's vicious bite was powerful enough to crush a car. Even now, it still takes the crown for the strongest bite of any land animal, extinct or otherwise. Today's champion, the saltwater crocodile, clamps down on its prey with only about 25% of T-Rex's bite force. Unlike what you might expect, it wasn't sharpness that set Rex's teeth apart. In fact, David tells us they were only about as sharp as a banana. No, what made them unique was actually their thickness. They were thick enough to shatter bone, allowing T-Rex to gobble up its prey in one bloody go. Skin, muscle, bones, the works. Of course, T-Rex's mighty maw wasn't the only thing going for it. It was one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs, well, ever. Its skull alone was about the length of a park bench. It had exceptionally acute hearing and sense of smell, ideal for hunting down prey and scavenging their remains, and keen eyesight like a modern bird of prey. Scientists even think it could see into the ultraviolet spectrum and recognize colors invisible to our human eyes. And unlike most meat-eating dinosaurs, T-Rex's grapefruit-sized peepers were forward-facing, offering greater depth perception. Plus, it likely wasn't the dum-dum we see on TV. The size of T-Rex's brain indicates intelligence well beyond most of its fellow dinosaurs, and even beyond today's reptiles. A powerhouse as mighty as the T-Rex doesn't just pop up in the geologic record. It took about 70 million years of evolution to transform from kangaroo-sized predators into the hulking giants that earned the scientific name Tyrant Lizard King.
This is a branch of the carnivorous dinosaur family tree that began alongside much bigger carnivores.
Meet Dr. Scott Persons, professor of paleontology and curator of the Mace Brown Museum of Natural History at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. Scott was mentored by HM&S's curator emeritus of paleontology, Dr. Bob Bacher, who helped him dig up his first dinosaur bone when he was just a boy. Now he's a dinosaur tail and movement expert in his own right, and he's been studying Wyrex's unique anatomy on and off for a decade.
Tyrannosaur lineage, the group from which they come, starts out as sort of the predatory mailroom clerks, and they work their way up. There's evidence to suggest that they actively outcompeted some of the older, more established lineages, things like the Allosauroids, Carcharodontrosaurids.
Despite Rex's seemingly cushy seat at the top of the food chain, Scott says there was likely no harder job in the late Cretaceous than being a tyrannosaur.
If you're a Triceratops, okay, you can go your whole day without any sort of issue. You can go weeks, you can go months, and you're just munching along happily. If you're a Tyrannosaur, then probably nearly about every other day, you're looking to pick a fight with a multi-ton opponent. It's a dangerous, dangerous lifestyle. And we see that in big predators today. Big cats get beaten up all the time.
What he means is T-Rex's meals fought back like their lives depended on it. Because, well, they did. Triceratops pierced attackers with its horns. Pachycephalosaurus head-butted opponents with its domed, spike-rimmed noggin. And Chylosaurus bashed enemies with its clubbed tail. And Stegosaurus, well, it died out around 80 million years before Rex even showed up, so they never crossed paths. Seriously, you gotta stop trusting movies. Yes, even that one. These skirmishes were akin to barroom brawls, quick, chaotic, and bloody. They left their mark in the form of battle scars. Most T-Rex skeletons are covered in them, and no one's seen more of them than Pete. The Black Hills Institute, which celebrated its 50th anniversary in March, houses one of the largest collections of T-Rex specimens in the world. Pete started the collection in 1990, soon after his highly publicized excavation of Sioux, one of the largest and most complete Rexes ever found. These days, it features bones from 15 to 20 various T-Rexes, including 3 original skeletons and about 12 cast skulls.
I don't think there's an adult or even subadult T-Rex that doesn't have multiple injuries. Some of them are just like injured over and over and over again.
Of course, we see broken teeth like you would expect on a carnivore, because eventually they're going to bite into a bone and maybe the bone's not going to give or not going to break, and the tooth will give first. We see bite wounds on the head, on the jaws of T-Rex. They manifest themselves as puncture wounds, where you'll have a hole that's almost always been healed, but sometimes we'll see pieces of bone that are trying to refuse, so they're in the process of healing. We find lots of injuries in the tail. We see injuries to the feet and to foot bones, where you have a bone that's been broken and healed. We see healed and broken ribs. We see injuries in the limbs. There's a broken and healed fibula in Sioux the T-Rex, and that fibula also had an infection.
But Wyrex's injury is anything but ordinary. His tail isn't just broken, it's been sheared in two. The vertebrae severed at an odd angle, the stubby remainder splintered and uneven. Triceratops or Ankylosaurus could certainly have damaged a T-Rex's vertebrae, Pete explains.
But it wouldn't have broken it clear through and torn it off.
That would have required exceptional bite force, which narrows the field of suspects down considerably, but not completely. So we took a closer look at the bone. There, in the jagged edge of the break, is a tooth impression. A conical tooth impression. Only one animal had the jaw strength and rounded tooth shape required to create this particular wound. Another T-Rex. Just like today's apex predators, Rexes often went toe-to-toe, or rather tooth-to-tooth, over food, territory, or mates. That's probably what happened between Wyrex and this other, likely bigger T-Rex. It's impossible to know how exactly Rex Battle Royale went down, but we've used our conversations with the experts, a few dino documentary fight sequences, and some dramatic license to imagine how the confrontation might have gone. It's a Tuesday evening, and Wyrex has been stalking his way between pine and redwood trees, hunting for lunch. Hours have passed without any luck, and it's starting to get hot. Wyrex decides to take a siesta and resume when the evening air turns cool and the dim light will make it easier to sneak up on his prey. As he turns to head back the way he came, he catches the scent of his favorite prey, Edmontosaurus. Nostrils flexing, he follows the appetizing odor. It's fresh and bloody, just the way he likes it. He's getting close when the wind shifts. There's something else here. Something dangerous. Fear courses through Wyrex's veins as he smells another Rex. He bolts, feet pawing at the swampy ground, kicking up a stream of muck in his wake. He crashes through the underbrush of a palm grove and runs right into her. A female T-Rex, several years his senior and a full ton heavier. She snarls, pulling her lips back and baring her teeth. One is missing. She's clearly a veteran fighter and is telling him to back off. But Wyrex doesn't take the hint. Predatory instincts kicking into overdrive, he charges her. Wyrex and the bigger female now stand nearly jaw to jaw. For a few terrifying moments, they circle each other. Muscular necks flexing and twisting, mouths open as wide as possible, searching for an opening. She spots one first and grabs for his neck, teeth scraping into the skin of his upper jaw. He turns his head at the last second, avoiding the brunt of the hit. But she's quick. She lands another bite and pulls, dragging him forward a few inches by his head before he can shake her off. The fear is gone. He's angry now. Wyrex retaliates, sinking his teeth into her lower jaw, and she growls louder. He can feel the vibrations through his hold on her neck. She leans back, bracing on her thick tail, skin and muscle tearing as she breaks his hold. Blood drips from the elongated gouges on her face, and Wyrex feels his adrenaline surge. Maybe he can win this. He leans in for another strike, but in a flash, she kicks out, and Wyrex feels the talons of her foot rake across his belly. Now he's bleeding too. Should he flee? He can't turn his back to her, and he's not sure he can slip by her. He's in too deep. So he lunges at her side with all his strength, head tilted to ram into her. And it goes wrong. With a burst of sudden speed, the female pivots like a matador, narrowly avoiding the horns of a bull. The momentum of his attack throws Wyrex off balance. He stumbles past her. Before he can right himself, she's latched on to his tail. She squeezes and squeezes and squeezes until crack! The tailbone breaks with a sickly snap. Wyrex crashes to the ground, writhing in agony. Blood gushes past the torn sinew of his mutilated hind limb. Victorious, the female drops her meaty prize and moves toward Wyrex's prone form to deliver the final blow. She's almost reached him when a tree topples over nearby. She turns, moving toward the intrusion, and sensing opportunity, Wyrex limps off, barely escaping with his life. Maybe another T-Rex got the drop on him while he was sleeping. Surely this dismembering, however it happened, is what killed Wyrex, right? Actually, no. His severed 12th vertebrae tells a different story. Dinosaur bones, like human bones, are normally smooth, but Wyrex's splintered bone has a rough, spongy texture, as if parts have been eaten away by acid. This, Pete reveals, is a sign of infection.
Quite often when we have a break in a bone, that bone will get infected as well. And that usually happens because the fracture is a compound fracture where the skin is broken and bacteria can get in and infect not only the flesh, but the bone itself.
Wyrex's infection was a serious one, deep enough to begin dissolving bone and spread to the 11th vertebrae and part of the 10th. For this level of infection to occur, Wyrex must have survived at least a few months. Eventually, the wound turned gangrenous, leading to a slow, painful demise.
Bone was still trying to fight the infection, but in the end, it either didn't have enough time or the infection killed it. Even the king of beasts can be killed by these little tiny microbes.
Wyrex's injury also would have made it incredibly difficult to hunt during his final days. See, dinosaur tails were there for more than balance. According to research over the last 20 years, including our friend Scott's, the junk in these prehistoric trunks also played a major role in overall movement, helping control speed, momentum, and maneuverability.
A major function of dinosaur tails across most non-avian dinosaur groups has to do with locomotion. There's a great big muscle that's located at the base of a dinosaur's tail. It's called the caudofemoralis, and it has an attachment site to the femur. And it's actually the primary hind limb retractor muscle in a dinosaur.
Think of it like your glutes. They keep you upright and propel your body forward as you take a step. Scott's research in particular found that T-Rex's M. caudofemoralis was adapted to contract and expand more quickly than those in large herbivorous dinosaurs, allowing Rex to pump its legs at a faster pace, giving them extra power in every large step, and the ability to run. Modern scientists put Rex's running speed anywhere from 15 miles per hour up to 25 miles per hour. For perspective, Olympic gold medalist Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, reached a maximum speed of 27.33 miles per hour in his world record sprint at the 2009 World Championships. He spent most of that race cruising to victory at around 23.35 miles per hour, well in T-Rex territory. Wyrex's devastating injury overlapped with a portion of his M. caudofemoralis. While he still had most of his muscle, the wound would have been seriously debilitating, making it difficult to chase after prey.
Imagine having a big section of your thigh muscle removed or your glutes removed, and how hard it would be for you to walk. And in this case, you would not just be, I lost part of my right glute, you would have lost your left and your right simultaneously. This was not just, I've got this stubby tail now. This is not like some lizards who can lose their tails and then just go scuttling about along their business. This would have been an injury that really affected the animal's ability to move around at a fundamental way through its environment.
How did Wyrex live for months after his injury if he could barely walk? Well, paleontologists now believe that T-Rexes were actually pack animals. If that's the case, Wyrex may have lived a little longer thanks to the kindness of his friends. And since we're on the topic of fresh meat, although there's no evidence to tell us what happened to the rest of Wyrex's missing tail, we have a pretty good guess.
Tail is where the good meat is.
Thanks, David. Obviously, Wyrex is best known for his missing tail, but there's much more to this specimen than his lost battle. He's got the most complete and best preserved feet of any T-Rex. He also has some of the best hands. Part of what makes them so remarkable is the remnant of a third vestigial finger digit, something that's only been found on one other Rex. And he's the only Tyrannosaur to date that's been found with skin. His skin is such a big deal that Pete, Scott, and several other paleontologists published a paper on it in 2017. And their findings weren't what anyone in the scientific community expected. Unlike the large plate-like scales on Tyrannosaur relative, the crocodile, Wyrex's scales are small and pebbly, about the size of the scales on an emu foot. But there's something even more noteworthy. And in true Wyrex fashion, it's about what researchers didn't find. There's no evidence of feathers in any of the dozen skin samples Pete and his team recovered. Let's unpack this for a sec. The idea of dino feathers goes back to the dinosaur renaissance, a paleontological revolution that began in the late 60s. Led by trailblazers like HMNS's own Bob Bacher, the movement updated the public's dino dossier in a major way. Suddenly, dinosaurs were warm-blooded social animals. They were fast, despite their extraordinary size. And they had feathers. Well, T-Rexes still didn't. They'd get added in the early 2000s, after descriptions of Tyrannosaur skeletons with fossilized feathers turned up in China. Now, we've all seen those images of T-Rex where it looks like it spent way too long in the dryer. Scott says these renderings, while common, aren't all that accurate. T-Rex feathers didn't look or function like bird feathers. They probably didn't even look like the downy fluff we see on baby chicks. Instead, Scott tells us to picture the sparse hairs on an elephant. From a distance, you wouldn't even know it was furry. This is because Rex feathers weren't meant for flight. Sorry to disappoint folks, there were no flying Rexes. Instead, they were there for temperature regulation.
Tyrannosaurus is living in an environment that's not so different from where I am right now in South Carolina, a subtropical, warm, cypressy swamp. If you're in that environment, you don't want to be walking around with a feathered coat. So when you think of a feathered tyrannosaur, you should really just be thinking of a fuzzy tyrannosaur.
But why does any of this matter if Wyrex wasn't feathered? Well, Scott and Pete actually think he was. The feathers just weren't visible in the recovered skin samples, which is entirely possible. The samples are tiny, smaller than a US postage stamp. On top of that, Pete and his team found a strange stem-like structure that could be a proto-feather, which would fit Scott's description of those fine, sparse dino hairs. However, modern scientific tests can't tell us if it's a Rex feather. The closest we can get with today's technology would be to determine if it's a feather at all, or some random plant matter.
Even if it was a feather, we can't say that it was from Wyrex or not, because it could have easily been a bird feather that floated down in.
Without a way to truly rule anything out, the idea of a feathery T-Rex lives on. Of course, some scientists think the skin samples in question aren't Wyrexes at all. Remember that turtle we mentioned at the beginning of this episode? Well, Pete and his team found 22 fossilized turtle shells in Wyrex's lake. Pete says they likely descended on the Rex after his demise to munch on his corpse, because apparently not all turtles are as sweet and innocent as they pretend to be on TikTok. Anyway, naysayers think the samples may really belong to them, but even that's not as straightforward as it sounds. None of the turtles were found super close to Wyrex, so for this alternative theory to be correct, a chunk of turtle skin would have needed to have sloughed off one of these deceased turtles, drifted 6, 7, maybe even 8 feet across the pond, and gotten lodged against Wyrex's skeleton. It's unlikely, but not impossible. Which side of the great skin debate is right? Well, we're working on finding out once and for all. When fossils are collected during a dig, they're never completely removed from the ground. Instead, crew members partially expose the bones before covering them and the natural rock encasing them, what's called a matrix, in layers of plaster and burlap bandages. It's like when a doctor puts a cast on a broken leg. We call this hard protective sandwich of plaster, rock, and fossil a field jacket. Paleontologists aren't picky about what they bring back from the field. Everything from bone to plant matter and even the rock itself contains scientific information. So excavations typically result in lots of field jackets. The Wyrex dig had 11. Not every jacket gets cleaned, documented, and mounted right away. Parts of an excavation that aren't considered high priority can sit in storage for years, sometimes even decades, until someone has extra time or there's a new reason to investigate. That's what's happening now. Pete and the Black Hills Institute prepared all of the fossil jackets containing Wyrex's bones. But a fossil jacket containing 2 turtle shells has been chilling in bubble wrap and boxes at Marconi, HM&S's off-site facility. Last October, our fossil prep lab pulled it out and started extracting those turtles from their rocky confines. The purpose is to see whether or not they find any additional skin fragments.
If we find skin directly associated with the turtles and it looks exactly like the skin that we have found alongside of Wyrex, then maybe the folks who said it was turtle the whole time had something right and it never came from Wyrex to begin with. But if we don't find any, it continues to not rule out the possibility that the skin is coming from Wyrex.
This is Colin Diggins, manager of the museum's fossil prep lab, who's overseeing the excavation of the turtle jacket.
So very often with science, it's if you can't prove something, you can at least try and disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, then it continues to be plausible, if not outright proven. So how we go about trying to prove something is also part of this story, too.
It's a painstaking process. The turtle jacket is about 2.5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, 18 inches thick, and easily weighs 600 pounds. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and every bit of rock must be chipped away under a microscope to ensure nothing is missed. So far, Colin and his team haven't found any skin, but they have uncovered plant material and a few isolated bones, most likely from a fish.
All of the rock matrix, all the stuff we're pulling out from around those turtles will also potentially be researched and studied, looking for evidence of microfossils, tiny organisms that are not visible with the naked eye or even under the microscopes we're using here in the lab, to learn more about the depositional environment, so how these things were buried.
At their current turtle pace, the project will take at least a year to complete. Once the excavation is done, the results, whatever they may be, will be put on display in our paleontology hall. And HM&S isn't the only one with big dreams for Wyrex's skin. Scott wants to use different kinds of light to chemically analyze the samples, which would go a long way toward identifying any sparse feathers overlooked in the original research. Even after all that, David says there's still plenty of meat left on the bones of the Wyrex mystery.
There's also other little bits of dinosaurs in there. There's also plants. There's the geology and the chemistry of the pond that he was buried in. We haven't looked at that. So there's a lot of little details moving forward. That's one of the things I'm kind of excited about. So it's like you're getting to know a friend. You don't know them fully, so you get to know more about them all the time.
Wyrex generated some answers, and Wyrex also generated a lot of hypotheses. So that's the fun part about paleontology. It's testing your ideas and seeing where it goes.
You've been listening to Beyond Bones, a podcast from the Houston Museum of Natural Science. This episode was written and directed by Emma Schloven
and edited by Johnny Hemberger. Hey, y'all.
Special thanks to our guests Colin Diggins, Pete Larson, Dr. Scott Persons, and David Temple. Got an object from our collection or a science question you've been dying to learn about? Let us know at podcasts@hmns.org. We might even feature your idea in an upcoming episode. Plus, don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to our little pod on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Leaving a review helps us reach even more curious minds. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.